This is the second worst air crash in the world in history. There were 524 people on board, and only 4 survived in this air crash. We can see the miraculous rescue process of the crew, and we can also see the ineffective rescue of the Japanese self-defense forces. We will learn more about this very famous Japan Flight 123 accident on August the 12th, 1985. Japan Flight 123 was preparing to fly from Tokyo Haneda Airport to Osaka Atami Airport, a total of about 400 kilometers. The plane was a large Boeing 747 passenger plane with a total of 524 people on board, including 509 passengers and 15 crew members. Here we should especially mention the 3 people in the cockpit. 39-year-old co-pilot Shigeo Sato, 49-year-old Captain Yagi Koika, who was mainly responsible for radio communications and supervising the co-pilot, and also served as an instructor of the Japanese aviation department, with very rich flying experience. In addition, there was a flight engineer Tetsuya Fukuda. The combination of these 3 people is also called the Miracle Crew. If it were not for their calm response to various problems, there would be no survivors in this tragedy. At 6:12 that evening, the plane took off from Haneda Airport, and everything was normal during the takeoff phase. 12 minutes later, when the plane climbed to an altitude of 7,300 meters, there was a sudden loud noise at the rear of the cabin, and explosive decompression occurred in the passenger cabin. This meant that there was a hole somewhere in the plane, but the actual situation was that the vertical tail of the plane fell off, and the oxygen masks in the passenger cabin also fell off, and the passengers immediately fell into panic. The captain immediately issued an emergency code of 7,700 in the cockpit, which is the highest level of risk signal. Bad news came one after another. The flight engineer found that the oil pressure dropped rapidly, and oil pressure was the key to operating the aircraft, including steering, landing gear and elevators. All of them need oil pressure to operate. For large aircraft, no oil pressure is equivalent to losing control of the aircraft, and human power cannot operate the aircraft. The 3 people in the cockpit decided to return to Haneda Airport urgently, but the captain found that the aircraft had lost control, and could not even perform basic steering operations. Worse, without the vertical tail, it was difficult for the aircraft to maintain balance. Air traffic control found that the flight trajectory of Japan Airlines Flight 123 was chaotic and seemed to have lost control, so they contacted the crew by radio. But strangely, the captain did not respond immediately, nor did he ask for help from Japan Airlines, and even the inquiries from ground air traffic control were not answered. As the chief instructor of the flight department, the captain obviously could not be scared. Why did he behave like Alzheimer's? The investigation found that the explosion caused the aircraft to decompress, but the 3 people in the cockpit did not wear oxygen masks. Although the co-pilot and the engineer mentioned this, the captain did not respond. It may be because the captain was older and had a hypoxic reaction at the time. After the aircraft's altitude decreased, the captain gradually recovered, and the co-pilot found a way to control the aircraft in the left and right swings. Although most of the aircraft's control systems have failed, the co-pilot found that every time the throttle was pushed down, the aircraft would climb. When the altitude reached the limit that the aircraft could withstand, the throttle was retracted and the aircraft would descend. In this way, the aircraft can continue to fly, but the overall altitude is still decreasing. If it cannot land quickly, the aircraft will still be doomed. Not only that, after repeated testing of the throttle, the crew also found that the direction of the aircraft can be controlled by the throttle. When the throttles of the left and right engines are unbalanced, the aircraft will turn due to the imbalance of thrust. For example, when the throttle on the right is smaller, and the throttle on the left is larger, the aircraft will turn to the right. This method later indirectly saved many aircraft, such as United Airlines Flight 232 and Philippine Airlines Flight 434. Back to the point, the ability of the aircraft to turn means a chance to return to the airport. But without a tail, it is not safe to land even if it reaches the airport. In fact, when the explosion occurred, their fate was doomed. But the 3 crew members did not give up. They tried their best to control the aircraft, and fight for the chance of survival. For the 509 passengers in the cabin, through the control of the throttle, the aircraft stayed in the air for 31 minutes, but as the altitude continued to drop, the tragedy could not be reversed. Japan Airlines Flight 123 eventually crashed near Mount Takamagahara at a speed of 641 km per hour. Afterwards, investigators learned from the black box recording that the captain was still shouting "try again" until a few seconds before the crash. In the last half hour from the explosion to the crash, the crew calmly controlled the aircraft and looked for opportunities to survive. Their inner fluctuations were not revealed until the end of the recording. Unfortunately, the Japanese self-defense forces performed very poorly in the rescue, which also caused many passengers to miss the best rescue time, 24 minutes after the plane crashed. a US military plane discovered the crash site and immediately reported the location to the Japanese authorities. However, half an hour later, no Japanese rescue team was seen at the scene. The US military proposed that they rescue first, but for some reason they were rejected, and said that they would let the self-defense forces go. Later, people speculated that this might be because Japan did not want the US military to enter the scene. After all, the crashed model was a Boeing. However, what's worse is that the Japanese self-defense forces helicopter flew around the crash site twice and left, claiming that the mountain conditions were too bad to land. Although this is indeed the case, why not send 1 or 2 people to check the situation? What is even more incomprehensible is that, when the helicopter left, the self-defense forces immediately dispatched ground troops, but they believed that such a serious accident was unlikely to have survivors. In addition, due to the rain and difficult mountain roads, they actually camped overnight more than 60 kilometers away from the crash site, and did not enter the mountains to search until the next day, which was 14 hours after the crash. In the end, they only found 4 survivors, and the remaining 520 people were all killed. The survivors later said that there were still many survivors in the hours after the crash, but they did not receive timely rescue, and eventually died gradually in the cold rain. The poor performance of the Japanese self-defense forces was suffocating, resulting in the death of these survivors. The accident investigation report pointed out that the tail of Japan Airlines Flight 123 was damaged before the accident, and Boeing did not properly install the tail during maintenance. The panel that should have been fixed with 3 bolts only used 2, resulting in a decrease in metal fatigue resistance. After tens of thousands of flights, the panel finally could not withstand the pressure. The tail fell off, the pressure line ruptured, and the aircraft lost control. Although only 4 people survived the air crash, it was not the fault of the aircraft. In subsequent simulations, no plane could continue to fly in a loss of control, and most of them crashed quickly, but they persisted for 31 minutes and even avoided complex terrain. Although the captain was slow to react due to blood oxygen problems, and made some mistakes, they still deserve respect and are called a miracle crew.